This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show, as together we hear how they are making their world better. Hello and welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. So glad you're tuning in again today. I hope you're having a great week so far. And wherever you are as you're listening to this podcast, I've got a very important topic today. I've had a couple of people on the show recently about this issue of staff retention. Most recently, Julia Devine. But this one, in fact, if you would listen to my interview with Julia, you'll remember we referenced a study on staff retention. Well, on the show today is the co-author of that study, Michelle Flores Vryn. Michelle's going to be here to talk all about this issue of staff retention and what we can do as nonprofit leaders really to mitigate that issue. So a couple of things just to whet your appetite here. So did you know that 74% of nonprofit workers are currently considering leaving their jobs, and a large percent of those are thinking about leaving the nonprofit sector altogether? Also, surprisingly, it wasn't just in the development area. In fact, the top area where people are leaving and thinking about leaving their job in the nonprofit sector is the marketing and programming area. We'll also talk about hybrid work and remote work and what's that proper balance between giving people flexibility, but also keeping staff cohesion. So all of these things and more will be discussed as Michelle shares a bit more about the results from her survey. And here's the other good thing is this is going to be something that her and Evan, the other co-author who also was on the show, they're going to do this every year. So it's kind of an ongoing study to make sure they're keeping up with real-time data. So if you're dealing with staff retention, which I'm guessing you are, everybody I talk to that's in the nonprofit sector right now is dealing with this very issue. You'll want to tune into this one. This is a very important topic and just a fun conversation. Michelle provides some great insights. So as always, thanks for tuning in. Now on to the show. Well, welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I've got another special guest here today. If you've been listening to my podcast, I've talked recently quite a bit about staff retention and the culture of a nonprofit organization. And both of those issues we're going to talk about today because there's a study that my guest is co-author of, and it sounds like it's going to be an annual study. It's going to be an ongoing thing where they'll continue to get more information. So I'm really excited to introduce to you Michelle Flores Vryn. Michelle, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely. Always happy to talk about nonprofit staff retention.
It's a huge issue. As I was saying before we hit record, literally, I'm talking to so many people. This is front of mind, certainly for all executive directors, but anybody at a nonprofit organization, I think right now is really concerned about this because the stats as we're going to go through today aren't looking great for nonprofits in general, let alone just the sector. A lot of people are leaving the sector altogether, and we're going to get into that. So let's start with this. You and your colleague, Evan Wildstein, who was on the show not long ago, have put together this really cool study that I'd like to go dive into. And I'll, of course, give a link in the show notes when we post this podcast. But it really talks a lot about turnover and what you have found in terms of the number of workers seeking to leave the sector. So let's just start out with, from your research, what were some of the key factors that are causing what you found was 74% of nonprofit workers considering leaving their jobs now, and how can organizations proactively address these factors before they leave?
Yeah, great question. So the top line is, for me, one thing that I anticipated seeing more of a reason for people leaving was actually not one of the reasons, and that was toxic culture. Like, I figured a lot of people would say, it's just a bad culture here, and that really wasn't even one of the top three reasons. So let me tell you what the top three reasons were. So the first one was really having in their roles too much responsibility to feel like they could do it, and also not having support within that role. So that was one of the top reasons, and it tied with another one, which said that there was really no clear pathway for growth within that organization. So those came in as top two tied. And for listeners out there, I think that, a lot of us have felt that, right? Like that there's probably like an emotional resonance there of too much responsibility, not pathways to growth. And then the third one was just really not being compensated accurately for what they're doing. The benefits weren't there. And that really caused them to look in other places.
Interesting. Yeah. Those are the top three. Yeah. And I think you're right. All three of those, you can all resonate. Either you've been on the other side of that, or you're trying to mitigate against that as an executive director, or if you're leading your organization. Now, another interesting thing along those lines you found, I noticed there was a big difference in turnover rates between staff who have less than 10 years of experience compared to those with more than 10 years of experience. Talk about that a little bit more. Why was that? And what did you find out?
Yes. So people who had stayed in the industry longer were more likely to stay for the long term. So if you had less than 10 years of experience, there's about a 69% chance that you may be looking for somewhere else in the coming year. If you had more than 10 years of experience, you are more likely to be staying within your role. One thing that I wished that we would have done a better job of maybe asking, and hopefully we'll do this in the upcoming year, of tell us more about why that is the case. My first assumption would be, people within nonprofits that have, been here more than 10 years, they've seen a lot of, the undulations, right? The ups and downs have kind of been through so much. And it's probably more normal for them to feel like, yeah, I'm unhappy in certain areas, but it could come back around. Now, that's a presumption. Like, I didn't have that in the qualitative data. But I also feel like there is probably this issue of people can make money in different ways now. I mean, for any of us who are on LinkedIn in particular, I think we know there's so many different fractional marketing or fractional accounting or development roles. People have their side hustles. And I do feel that in today's era, there's just more options available to you, or you see those options, or you're more likely to pursue them. Again, we didn't specifically ask about this in the first year, but I'm hoping, next year that we will, because I feel like that's probably the reason, but we'll get at it, closer with data, backed up evidence for year two.
No, it's great. Absolutely. Look forward to getting the results from that. Okay, and now another key issue for all nonprofits is managing their budget, right? Most nonprofits don't have just a flush amount of cash. They're just like, oh, where do we spend this? It's always the idea of stewardship, right? Managing the resources you have. You probably don't ever have quite enough to really do what you want to do, hire the people that you want to hire. So you're always trying to really keep one eye on the books as you're trying to expand and grow. But also you want to take care of the people that you have. And so managing one's budget in the nonprofit world really is a challenge. So when it comes to retaining staff, how can nonprofits better balance their budgets on the one hand while still improving compensation and benefits for their employees in order to stay competitive and current with the industry standards? What did you find on that one?
Yeah, so here is a really doable answer, which I'm glad to offer this to the audiences. Let me back up and introduce this section of the survey. Is we not only asked people, why are you leaving, but also what would make you stay? And I loved this section of the survey. And I didn't know what people were going to say. And what most people said was, what would make me stay? Well, that's easy. It's going to be more flexible work conditions. And so 82% of people said, if I were going to stay, it would be because of more hybrid or remote working options.
Interesting.
And that's, not shocking, right? I mean, I think for all of us, like, we like to have more autonomy over our time. Like, we want to be able to not have work take over our whole lives. And for us working in the social impact sector, that's a hard one because our hearts are so woven into this work. And I think it can quickly take over our lives. So more flexibility at work is definitely something that will keep people in their roles longer. So I just really want to highlight that for folks of, like, if you don't have more flexible working arrangements for your staff right now, really, really think about what could you do, because that's something people want. They're telling us they want it, and that there's no cost necessarily associated with that.
That's a great point. Let's dive in that a little deeper and double click on that, so to speak. The hybrid and remote work has become such a key issue and a topic of discussion. Certainly, I'd say since COVID, right? That's when I felt like it really became like, you really have to address this and be flexible more than ever. So what is that right balance from what you've seen? Maybe you don't have the data yet, but from your just own experience, your interaction with other nonprofit leaders, how do you find that right balance? On the one hand, giving staff flexibility like remote work or hybrid work, but at the same time, the importance of building staff cohesion, right? And allowing for proximity for staff to help them connect better. And not only to mention productivity, that can be something that can go down sometimes potentially with remote work. So yeah, what have you found to be a good balance between those two?
I mean, I think one thing that really pops in here is really managing meetings and the way you're spending time in a more rigorous way. And what I mean by that is, like we sometimes, Rob, I don't know if you're finding this, but I am. It's like if we really look at the way we're spending our time with meetings, whether they be virtual or in person, sometimes we're not structuring them for the highest use of our time. So that's a key one for me. And this is not a nonprofit specific comment, but I think we all see the memes on social media and the commentary of like, people being in meetings and feeling like I don't even have to be in this meeting. Why am I here? Like I just kind of, unmute to agree and then like move back. It's like, so I think we have to really look at like the time we have people on the clock. How are we structuring that to where it's really leading towards the results that we want? I will say, like, I feel like in COVID, this created an interesting scenario to where, COVID occurred and we all tried to do our best to connect with each other to make sure the train didn't completely roll off the rail and work was still being done. And I think a lot of the way we did that was through all these meetings, like we just want to make sure people are okay. Let's connect. What do you need? But it has transpired into this system of like just endless meetings. And so I just really encourage people to like take a step back and embrace a reflective moment of, do people feel like this is the best use of their time? Following on this trend of like the best use of your time, when you have people in the office, really think about how are they spending their time there? Like, are you encouraging group collaboration on the whiteboard? I remember I was in a role in the past to where I was supposed to come in one day a week, and I did, but I was in meetings all day. So I would like shut my door because especially for fundraising stuff, like there's sensitive stuff that's being discussed. So I would shut my door, be on the meetings, throughout the day. And then, it's like 3 or 4 o'clock and you'd open your door and basically the day's over and you hadn't talked to anyone. So you have to really ask yourself, like, why am I here? Like, I'm just shut up in this office and I'm not even connecting with my colleagues. So I think that's another piece, is just taking the time to reflect on intentional structure around when you are in the office, make it worth people's time. Because I do think people like to connect, but sometimes that doesn't happen organically. It does need to have a little bit of intentionality wrapped around it.
Oh, that's good. I like all those thoughts on that. Okay, let's talk about some areas of a nonprofit that maybe are seeing more turnover than others. I know we talk quite a bit about development. There's been all kinds of studies on development roles and how the tenure, I should say, of how long someone stays for development now is really short. I've heard 18 months now is an average. So that's really difficult, right? To build any kind of continuity. In a year and a half, it takes a while just to get to know the donors, and then you're off and running and you get a new person coming. So that's a real challenge. But your study, in addition to development being an issue, you've actually found marketing and programming roles were also considering leaving. And so there's some turnover going on there that we need to address too. Why is it the case that, in your opinion anyway, from what you found, and what can be done to improve people's job satisfaction and prevent them from leaving, specifically within the marketing and programming roles? Was there anything unique to those departments that you thought, maybe here's some things to think about to improve them, their experience, and keep them from leaving?
Yeah. I mean, great question. I will say, I think Evan and I were both a little surprised that fundraising wasn't the top turnover role area, because we're used to being categorized like that. I'm a professional fundraiser, so I can say like I definitely have felt that stigma of people always feeling like you're going to leave any day now. But to your point, marketing and programming were really the two highest turnover role areas. And I think specifically for marketing, one of the reasons is similar to turnover in fundraising, which is because people understand less about what you do, you get less investment in what you do. I always say that I think marketing and fundraising should be best friends because they both share a couple of things. One is everyone thinks they know how to do your job, even though they've never done it. So like marketers get like the whole social media stuff. Like, have you ever thought about, a TikTok account? And fundraisers get the same thing. Like, we always get that. Like, have you ever thought about the ice bucket challenge? Um, so I think that there is that shared element of everyone thinks they understand what you do and that they can step into making suggestions about it. But following that, when you're budgeting, I do feel like marketing is probably one of the most undersourced areas of all nonprofits. And so they're in similar situations as fundraisers. Fundraisers are often like, you have this director of development, which is like the database person and the event coordinator and the major gift person. But marketers suffer from the exact same thing. They're doing social media, they're doing brand kits, they're fielding requests from different program areas or doing PR. So I do think that they are historically very underinvested in. Now, the programming area, that's interesting too. My hunch here is, with demand for services during COVID, almost all nonprofits showed an increase in demand for their services. And there's some big survey reports that we can link to in the show notes that can speak to this. But I think that the demand went up. Resources temporarily may have been imbued through COVID stimulus funding, but that demand still remains very high. And I suspect that's why their projected turnover is very high as well in programming.
We'll be right back. Are you ready to revolutionize your advocacy efforts and significantly impact policy change? Discover Quorum and level up your advocacy to better educate more lawmakers. Quorum is the only unified public affairs platform that empowers nonprofits to map, track, change, and report on the policy landscape, all in one place. Explore how Quorum Grassroots helps nonprofits create compelling campaigns in minutes. The result? Your nonprofit doesn't just participate in the advocacy, it drives it. Quorum, where influence meets innovation. You can learn more at quorum.us. Hey friends, and thanks so much for listening to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I want to let you know that I've recently become a professional certified coach. With my nearly 30 years of nonprofit experience, I know firsthand how hard you work as a leader. I also know how important it is to have someone you can call on to get help with the barriers, the leadership challenges that you will face both professionally and personally. And I really want people to thrive, to become all they were meant to become by providing coaching and consulting services. So if coaching is something you've always been interested in, but maybe weren't quite sure what it was all about, I encourage you to reach out. You can go to my website, robharder.com, or just email me at rob@robharder.com. I would happy to provide a free sample coaching session so you can determine if coaching is for you. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Now back to the show. All right, let's continue the conversation about coming up with best practices. We did talk about the hybrid option, remote options, being flexible with that. When it comes to best practices, and I would say maybe beyond just having the option of doing hybrid work or doing remote work, is there anything else with the overall schedule or arrangements of operations within a nonprofit organization where you found best practices of integrating that flexible work schedule and work life, if you will, into still accomplishing the goals of the nonprofit? What have you found is really working as best practices in the sector?
Yeah, this is something, if you follow Evan on LinkedIn or myself, I think we both talk about this topic a lot. And I kind of put it into an overarching umbrella of getting realistic about what you can accomplish with the resources you have. And this is really a leadership level conversation, right? Like, you have to be realistic between what you want to accomplish and what you can actually accomplish. And this is a tricky thing because I do think from a management and leadership perspective, sometimes you can push people to do things that even they didn't think they could do, right? Like, we didn't think we could make this capital campaign goal, and look at us, we did. We pushed ourselves and we did it. So I do think there is that element of sometimes that additional pressure gets you to become something that you thought was impossible. But I feel like right now in nonprofits, there's this real sense of urgency, like to scale. And I would just call it scaling in general. So that's usually like scaling your impact. To scale your impact, you have to scale your fundraising, and to scale, your impact, you also have to scale your operational capacity. And I feel like we've just inherited this mindset of, if you're not growing by 5, 10, or 15% a year, then you're just dying. Like you're stagnant, like we need to see growth every year. This is a complicated situation. This is a complicated topic. This could be a whole other podcast episode. But I think we really do need to think about, as leaders, the logic behind, can people realistically accomplish what we are asking them to do? And I think we need to look at our budget, and for fundraising specifically, because a lot of things stem from fundraising. Yes, we would like to increase by 10 or 15%, but with the market and with our funder reactions to our work, or how open they are to conversations with us, does that feel realistic? I think all levels of staff need a little bit of time to get their bearings and to maybe get really nestled into the work they're doing without having so much pressure to just scale. And I've thought about this a lot. I think we're losing so much in this conquest of just like grow as quickly as we can. And I think we should be growing, but let's not do it in an unnatural way, because if we lose all of our people, we're not going to grow at all.
Right. That's helpful. Okay. Yeah, you're right. I think there is always that push to grow beyond what's sustainable. And that can become the problem with burnout, which your study touches on too. When it comes to management and leadership of nonprofits specifically, maybe we can camp there for just a bit on specifically, are there specific aspects of leadership and management that are more looked to by nonprofit staff? So in other words, is there a way that as leaders, when you think about how you lead or the aspects of leadership that are particularly relevant for nonprofit leaders?
Yeah, I think that this is relevant to all leaders, but I will say leaders who are very invested in the well-being of their staff are not only the leaders that we need now, but I think at some point they're going to be, just the only leaders who are successful, because every staff person wants to feel like there's somebody at the helm who really cares about them. And it takes time to build those relationships. It does not happen overnight. And I think sometimes it doesn't happen organically. Even when you think about your meeting schedules, think about do you have time to get to know your people, and what are they feeling, and do you know their pets' names, and their spouses' names? And if your answer is overwhelmingly no, I really don't ever talk to them about who they are as a person, or know very little about them, I think you're failing as your job as a leader, because that is part of your job. You have to keep a touch point on how people are doing. And I think this is a piece about turnover as well, right? Is oftentimes leaders may feel very surprised that so-and-so left, but they really had no stake in a relationship with them. And if they did, they probably would have picked up on little signs, right? And I think we just have to make sure that we are checking in on our people. And also, I would push this a step further and say that is part of your job, leading and managing people. And if you don't want to do that, then you need to find a different role, because that is actually part of your job. So just making sure you're getting a sense of how is the tone and culture, and where do people need help?
Yeah, interesting. Culture is so important, isn't it? To create the right kind of culture. People really are attuned to that probably more than ever, I feel like now in the nonprofit sector and just across the board. I think in the workforce in general. Okay, AI. Let's move to that a little bit. I've had a lot of people on my show talk about AI recently. And from your research, when it comes to AI, do you think that AI and other technology for that matter perhaps could be used to help create greater efficiencies with the goal of reducing staff burnout? I know there's this balance too with AI and how much do you use and how much do you don't want to put too much into AI because then you lose that human touch. What have you found so far? Is there a nice balance there where it could really reduce some of that workload that you've seen as a huge cause of burnout?
I have a lot of thoughts on this, Rob.
Okay, all
and
right.
I will
Yeah,
just
this
say,
is a hot topic.
I will just also lay the caveat here that my dear friend Mina Das and myself have a survey out right now about AI use in nonprofits. And I
Oh,
mentioned that
interesting. Okay,
because,
I got to get that.
yes, another survey, more data. We love data here. And we did this survey because we think that these conversations about what is the highest and best use of AI in our nonprofit are not happening, and we're very concerned about that. What is happening is people are using it in their own little, siloed way out in their respective areas, and there isn't a comprehensive organizational conversation of how are we going to make this work for us. And that needs to happen really soon because people are using it. I guarantee you that. Like people are using it. And that's not necessarily bad, but I do think we want a more collaborative view on how do we make it work at this organization, because every organization has its own flavor and personality. There's some things that may carry over for all organizations, but we have our unique ways that we can adopt it. So I'm really hoping out of that other survey that we can steward conversations with executive leaders on how should they be thinking about, talking about AI in their organization, because that kind of leadership right now is not there. And to get to your point though about like how can we use it to help with organizational capacity, I think there's a couple of things. The first question would be within your team. So if you work in fundraising, the development team, for example, I would really encourage people to sit down at a team meeting, put this on the agenda and ask the open question of how do we feel about certain tasks that aren't the highest use of our time being, outsourced, if you will, to AI? And then what are the types of activities that we feel like these are human tasks? These are tasks that should never be not human executed, and start to have those conversations. Like some of it is literally just opening up the conversation, because I guarantee you people will jump in and say things like, I really don't like taking, the board or the committee meeting notes for the fundraising committee of the board. Can we use that? Can we use, and we'd be like, yes, let's absolutely use that. And let's have you contribute to that meeting. So I think the ideas are there. What we're missing is a safe and open space for us to galvanize around the best pathway forward as a group, as a team. And I think it's fine to start these in your team. So if you're a team lead for development or accounting, or, I would encourage you to think about how to open up these discussions and also just learn about what are people doing already.
Okay, good. No, that's excellent. I love it. Okay, so for those who have read your study or are going to read your study, hopefully after this podcast, more people will read it. What would you say are the most important next steps nonprofit leaders should take to implement the recommendations from your survey?
Yeah. So I will point out, of course, the survey is completely open, fully open, and we do have what we call at the bottom of each section, real talk takeaways. And so we actually made this for you as the reader. So I hope that you use this. And it really looks at tactical things that you can do under each topic area. So like if you're looking to grow your people, there's a section for that. And I'll just take that as an example. This is actually one of my favorite tactical takeaways is if you're looking to grow the career pathways for people on your team, you have to get to know them first, because you have to know like what they want to do with their future. And we have a template in there, which is hyperlinked. You click on it. It's called the All About Me exercise, and it's literally just a matrix where you can sit down with your team members and get to know more about each other. It's like 4 questions. It's very simple. And Evan and I were very intentional about that. So maybe just start there. Just start with bringing this to your next team meeting, the All About Me template, which is linked in the growth opportunities section, and see what comes out of that. It's never a bad investment of time knowing more about your people and what their aspirations are.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Well, I think people that are listening and maybe have heard your name but don't know much about this study, how can they find out, first of all, a little bit more about you? And then how can they also access this study? Now, I'll put it in my show notes, of course, but if there's other things online you recommend them to go to, where would they go online to find out more information?
Yes. So, of course, you can just Google the Social Impact Staff Retention Survey and that'll pop up. But it's hosted under the Nonprofiteers website, which is Evan's website that he maintains. It's a great website. He also has a link to his book, which I'll also plug for him. on servant leadership. So that's an easy way to view the survey. And in subsequent years, including this year, we hope to open up a new survey to keep this going. We want to, collect more data, and it will be on that nonprofiteers website as well.
Well, again, Michelle, thanks so much for taking time to be on the show. Share a bit about your resources, the data you found, because I think what you're doing is so important. It is so relevant, again, to everybody that's in a nonprofit role. So I'm glad you and Evan decided to do this study specifically on retention, but I think you're already pulling out some other things that have some, extra applications, if you will, to the rest of nonprofit leadership. So thank you again for all you're doing, and thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. It was a very tactical conversation, which is my favorite kind.
Oh, good. I could tell. Well, thank you again. Appreciate it. Hey, friends. Well, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to other podcasts. I also want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. This will actually help us get this great content out to more nonprofit leaders just like you. You can also join the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast community. Find other resources and interviews of past guests all on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Well, thanks again for listening. And until next time, keep making your world better. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Go to YouTube and look up Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. We'll see you there.